Washington State and Oregon State got good news, and that good news is in the form of money. Is it enough to buy their way into the Big 12? This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I am Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Let's talk Washington State and Oregon State finally figuring stuff out and possibly having a new home. Then in the middle segment, Duke and Gonzaga to the Big 12 is a rumor that exists. And finally, Caitlin Clark has too much power, and women's college basketball is not benefiting from Iowa beating West Virginia. Let's start Washington State and Oregon State and the shot at those two schools going to the Big 12 or another power conference. As you know, if you've watched this show for the last 6 months, I am rooting for those two schools wholeheartedly. They got left behind out of the Pac-12 that fell apart, and they need a whole lot of help. Well, the College Football Playoff Committee said, we're not really going to help you. Because if you'll remember, the way it was written was that the Pac-12 is still an existing entity according to the NCAA. And if that is the case for the next couple of years, that the College Football Playoff had already written it in, the Pac-12 had automatic bids to their postseason. So that would mean that either Oregon State or Washington State would have to go to the CFP. Well, then the board of directors and Kirk Schultz and everybody else came together and said, you know what? The Pac-12 doesn't exist anymore. And Washington State and Oregon State, they can't get automatic bids. Let's move on without that. And you know what? Let's toss them a bone, a couple $1 million a year. And now the conference itself will be, I say the conference, the teams exiting the conference that made up the conference will be paying Washington State and Oregon State $65 million. And I love that there's a statement that was put out by, it says like by the 10 teams that are leaving the Pac-12 in reference to paying their way out of the Pac-12 entirely in a way that closes the door on what this conference is. Now, that $65 million, is it enough to bring Washington State and Oregon State to the Big 12? Because I told you that if those two schools got the entire Pac-12 TV revenue that was left over, or the entire revenue that was left over for the College Football Playoff Committee, or that was already designated, that in that case, they would have enough prowess to be welcomed to the Big 12. But at this point, I don't think the price tag of $65 million is enough. The settlement notes, according to CBS, that departing members shall have no vote, direction, input, or other power with respect to the conference's use, allocation, or expenditure of funds. The Pac-12 exiting members can no longer control anything the Pac-12 does. That is up to Washington State and Oregon State. And through 2025 and beyond, anything the Pac-12 makes is Oregon State's and Washington State's to delegate. But here's the problem. Those two sports entities are already kind of falling apart. Washington State's athletic director just got hired as the president at Washington, their rival. That's not good. And you already saw that Oregon State's head football coach is now the head football coach at Michigan State. In seeing that these two programs are going to become mid-majors, that's what's happening. They have a contract with the Mountain West Conference and the WCC in basketball. And seeing that is the case currently, it's like the staff wants to get out of Dodge. They don't want to sit around and wait for that. And I understand that to an extent. But here's what I also think we all need to understand. This sucks for Washington State and Oregon State. And I get why in the last 24 hours I've been asked ad nauseum, will the settlement with the departing members give these two teams, these two schools, leverage? That's the word I've tried to use for them, leverage. How much leverage will they have come Wednesday, March 27th? Not enough to get into the Big 12. I thought 6 months ago that it was very possible, depending on how the conversations went with the College Football Playoff and the power that Kirk Schultz wielded. And I also believe that Washington State is a valuable school, and they still have hope, and Oregon State has hope if Washington State is pulling them up alongside them because of how good of a footprint Washington State has when it comes to TV. And if you know anything, or an everydayer of this show, or a one-dayer of this show, it is that the TV companies control the money and thus control college athletics across the board. Now, if it was up to me tomorrow, would I take Washington State and Oregon State? Here's the really tough part where I'm going to go against the rhetoric that I've given you for those last 6 months. I have said the Big 12 is a conference, is a business, and it is not an orphanage. However, I have a soft spot in my heart for Washington State and Oregon State because of the way they got left behind. Imagine your school, Texas Tech, TCU, Oklahoma State, Baylor, BYU, UCF, Utah, getting left behind and one day waking up and just not being a Power 5 program anymore. That sucks. The selfish part of me, the non-businessman part of me says, I wish these two schools had a spot in the Big 12. And the business side of me says Washington State is profitable enough for it to make sense. However, I don't believe, again, that their footprint is big enough, the brand is big enough, that the money they've been given in this settlement is big enough for them to wield it and have leverage to get to the Big 12. So what happens to those two schools? At this point, the hope is they can rebuild the Pac-12 with teams out of the Mountain West Conference, with a Boise State, a San Diego State, maybe go get a Memphis across at the AAC or a USF and try to piece something together as this all-American conference that becomes the premier fourth best league in the country when the ACC falls apart. And maybe that is the true just crutch here. The Big 12 is now focused on expansion eastward. When we first talked about the subject of Washington State and Oregon State, the reason I wanted those two schools is because I didn't know if our conference had enough prowess within itself to go to the ACC and say, I want you, I want you, I want you. And that has changed. As of today, with Clemson and Florida State voicing their displeasure with the ACC and their intent to leave, the Big 12 is now focused entirely on the East Coast, which is good news to Cincinnati fans, to West Virginia fans, to UCF fans. There will likely be new programs that are in that footprint that come to this conference. But that means that Brett Yormark has turned his attention away from the West Coast and toward the East Coast in trying to figure out how to bring in those schools, which does not bode well for Washington State and Oregon State if, in fact, their entire ploy here is to make it to the Big 12 or back into a power conference. That's not going to happen. Their new focus is on recreating the Pac-12 with other schools. I can confidently say that the campaign that I went on for these two teams, these two programs to be in the Big 12 failed. They didn't have the leverage that I expected them to have. They didn't have the leverage the contracts once gave them at the very end. And because of that, their best bet is to rebuild the Pac-12, which is quite possible for both schools. But as for the Big 12, if you're a Big 12 fan especially, you now turn your attention to what can happen in the ACC. And, brother, this is nuts. Apparently, Brett Yormark has turned his attention to the ACC, focusing more on basketball. At least that's according to one report. That is coming up here on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team, and it is every day. Today's show is brought to you by Better Together. It's the first cooperative daily fantasy application. Better Together offers a familiar experience for existing daily fantasy players with a social twist you can play with a friend or teammate. It provides a sense of camaraderie and enhances the social experience of watching sports. We're all doing it at Locked On right now. So all your favorite hosts like Cam Stewart across the way, he's doing Better Together, and we're getting to compete against one another in daily fantasy sports. Put groups in a group chat and prove who is the best. Meet, work, do it with fellow fans, do it with friends, do it with your coworkers. It is a great cooperative daily fantasy platform. You can go in, pick more or less on real-time player stats, strategize with your partners to boost your odds, and climb the leaderboard together with a friend and join the DFS movement. Download Better Together right now from the App Store. Sign up using promo code Locked On for a chance to win your share of over $1,000 in cash prizes. Remember the code Locked On because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. Visit Better Together today. Today's show is also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Amazon Fire TV is where I go to watch TV. And Locked On. Fire TV is your destination for sports, live games, highlights, in-depth analysis, and more. Baseball, college basketball, the NBA. It's Fire TV. Created TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite brands, including Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all the in-game analysis, highlights, and more to keep you up to date on the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV. Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/Locked On Fire TV. That is Amazon.com/Locked On Fire TV to learn more about how you can get Fire TV and watch more of me every single day. So this headline popped up. Gonzaga Brett Yormark has allegedly turned his eyes out east to Duke and still kind of out west to Gonzaga. I read this one from yardbarker.com, which I thought interesting. Haven't really heard them reporting on too many things that are very legitimate, but it came from a source who I guess is big in the sports world. Radio host, former Salt Lake City radio host Tim Montemayor reported on his show the Big 12 is pursuing Duke. He's quoted as saying, well-placed sources told us that the Big 12 is being aggressive with ACC basketball membership and has their eyes solely set on Duke to pair with Gonzaga. Full stop right there. Let's react. Duke and Gonzaga to the Big 12. That report, or the idea that that is something the Big 12 could do, it makes not a lot of sense. We have not talked about Duke being a very valuable member of the ACC when we are still having the conversation of Miami being on the table. When there are articles coming out about how Miami to the Big 12 makes the most sense. When Dennis Dodd is releasing an article that says there's a backup option where Clemson and Florida State fall to the Big 12. Why would we be talking about Duke and Gonzaga basketball? When basketball does not push the needle, why are we talking about it? Did you know that Kansas State, I was just reading the other day, Kansas State, the sports that make money and lose money. The only sports that make money are men's basketball and football. Everybody else loses money. And men's basketball makes $1 million or so a year, around there, if that. Football makes $30 million a year. That's the difference. When TV networks are talking about contracts and moving forward with pushing the needle in these conversations, they're not mentioning basketball. They're not coming to Brett Yormark saying, ESPN's not saying, if you create the greatest basketball conference of all time, we will match you in what we're paying the SEC and the Big Ten. No, football pushes the needle. Brands push the needle. Duke and Gonzaga do not push the TV needle. Do not push the footprint needle. Washington State does that even more than Gonzaga. So this is wild. The article goes on to quote and say, the Big 12 has been trying to persuade Gonzaga's basketball team to leave the West Coast Conference to join the conference, but has been unsuccessful so far. And that is complete and utter pop. I want to know who yardbarker.com is sourcing on that. The Duke Blue Devil News is sourcing on that here. What on earth? What? Riddle me this. You're Gonzaga playing in the West Coast Conference. The Big 12 comes to you, as it did BYU, and says, hey, come join our conference and make stupid amounts of money and play big-time competition and legitimize your regular season in college basketball. What part of that is Gonzaga in the driver's seat to say no? They're not. That is asinine to think that the Gonzaga Bulldogs athletic department has been turning down the Big 12. Montemayor says the Big 12 would love to add both Duke and Gonzaga to strengthen themselves as a premier basketball conference. Now, I don't doubt the Big 12 wants to be a premier basketball conference, but who's saying this and why are we saying this? Why right now? What is it right now that makes Duke and Gonzaga make the most sense when the rest of the ACC is about to fall apart? Montemayor, the Big 12 commissioner, Brett Yormark, is trying to forge relationships now in the case the ACC does fall apart. Yes, but why basketball? Why Duke when a North Carolina exists, when a Virginia exists? And I get that those two schools are probably going to the SEC or the Big Ten, but why would you overlook a Virginia Tech for a Duke? Why would you overlook and I get it academically and from an athletic standpoint, the football team was good, the basketball team was good. What we are talking about is viewership numbers in football. And again, I'm going to keep using that word, footprint, valuation. How much can you push the needle in this conference to make it money? And Duke isn't that when compared to Miami, who's going to be on the table, or even an NC State or North Carolina when those are on the table, or Virginia Tech, or a Pitt, or a Louisville. Those are the schools that matter. Brett Yormark is focused on that, not going and getting Duke and Gonzaga basketball when the ACC is falling apart. The ACC is being sued by Clemson and Florida State. The articles continue. The schools likely want to leave to join one of the other conferences. Finally, something that's right. Though the ACC gave Stanford and Cal a life raft from the Pac-12, the article says the conference won't be in the best position, especially in football, if Clemson and FSU can leave. Oh, wow. No brainer, huh? That would create the sort of unstable situation Yormark apparently would want to pounce on. Yes. Genius. Crazy how that is. Whoever is out there spreading like the source, this trusted source who's telling the Montemayor guy that that Duke and Gonzaga are on the table right now. We've been having the same dang Gonzaga conversation for 8 months now about, Brett Yormark's in Spokane. He's talking to Mark Few. He's talking to their athletic department. We're going to get Gonzaga, and it just hasn't happened. Like, if it was going to happen, it would have happened at this point. Don't you think? And then now, instead of any of the other, 5, 6, 7 ACC brands that are clearly better than Duke, again, brand, money better than Duke. The focus is on Duke in basketball. When the shark smells blood in the water, he doesn't think, I could just eat that sponge over there. No. There is a person sawed in half right now floating in the ocean. The shark can just eat it. The shark can go get it. That's the NC State. That's the Virginia. That's the UNC. That's who you go attack. You attack the person who's cut in half, bleeding everywhere. Gory, I know. You don't go back for the sponge, the easy little sponge at the bottom of the ocean. You already saw hey, you're the shark. You've been a part of the attack. You've been in on this thing. You don't give up now to go make it make sense. Why would it make sense for Brett Yormark to turn his attention away from the clear meal in front of him and say, I don't really want this. Maybe this was probably a better example to use in the very beginning. I'm going to be honest with you. That was, I hope I didn't scar you or your children that are listening. If he says, I can either have this big filet that's like on the table being brought, on the cart being brought to my table, or I can go, steal that guy. He got a salad, like Duke's your salad. Your filet is any of the other bigger brands in the ACC. We're not turning our attention away from the filet to go get the salad. But I guess sources close to the issue say that the Big 12 is pursuing Duke to join the conference. Oh my gosh. Like, seriously? Are we even listening to ourselves? It's baffling to me. Louisville, watch out, you're ours. Pitt, watch out, you might be ours. Duke? Ooh, for a basketball. Doesn't push the needle. Doesn't make as much money. People don't care as much. Football is the thing that does it. I need you to know that. Bring it to your water cooler. And people are like, Duke's going to the Big 12. No, not right now. Not right now. That's not the focus. Coming up, Caitlin Clark beat West Virginia. But did she? She had to, right? There's no way she wouldn't. Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. I love Nissan. That's why I drive a Nissan. I have a Nissan Maxima parked outside my house right now. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. The Iowa State Cyclones can be described as a pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch. They have created a lane for themselves, entering the tournament as one of the hottest teams in the country. They have a date with Illinois this Thursday in the Sweet 16. That's right, Iowa State, the pathfinder. They have found their path to the Sweet 16, and I believe they'll find their path to the Elite 8. They've been so dang good. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada. Go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. That is shopNissanUSA.com. Go find your next adventure. Proud sponsor of Locked On. Today's show is also brought to you by eBay Motors. If you got into a fender bender, that's fine. eBay Motors exists. If you got into a little bit of I scratched some paint, eBay Motors exists. If you say, I need a supercharger, a roof rack, exhaust kit, an LED headlight, and more, well, they have all those as well. eBay Motors has got you covered. 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You always feel like you get exactly what you need. You go in, you boop, 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 boop. Yep. You look at, hey, there it is. Out of the 122 million parts, it's definitely there. eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusion apply. eBay Motor, eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. That is ebaymotors.com. Iowa 64, West Virginia 54, the final. And I'll be honest with you, first and foremost, I did not expect to make a podcast about this game in the honest assumption that West Virginia would lose in Iowa City by double digits in a game that just got out of hand. But that wasn't the case. In watching Caitlin Clark and Iowa play against West Virginia, I was shocked at the way this game was taken out of the hands of the players. I understand. I'll preface. I went to Baylor. I get that women's basketball is underrated and underappreciated. It's one of the things that got me into sports at Baylor very early on because everything else was bad. I know the narratives of this sport are important, but placing a narrative over the actual result of a game, which I believe is what happened in this contest, is appalling and sets the sport back. I said the same thing when Iowa played LSU, a poorly officiated game in the national championship last year. And I'll say it here. The game was taken away from West Virginia. One of the points that I made mid-game is West Virginia can win. They can beat Iowa, but the scoreboard will not reflect that. For ESPN, for the tournament, for the sport, for the narrative overall, Iowa had to win this game. Am I upset that Caitlin Clark and Iowa are moving on? Am I upset that is a national storyline? Of course not. But I am upset with the way this game finished because West Virginia had not just a fighter's chance, but there were points in this game where that team was in control, where the Mountaineers were in control as an 8 seed facing a 1 seed on the road. And in the last 5 minutes, the last even 10 minutes, it just felt like a fair shake was not given. A 16-16 score in the fourth quarter after West Virginia went into that quarter down by nearly, I mean, they go into the quarter down by 10. You feel like, all right, here's where Iowa blows it wide open. West Virginia was able to play good defense in the second. Caitlin Clark did not win this game for Iowa over the course of the last 6 minutes or so. It was everybody else who came together. Like the narrative of, oh, Caitlin Clark plays hero. She comes in, she wins the game for Iowa. They move on. Wasn't exactly there. 5 for 14 from 3. It's good. It's really good. 8 for 22 from the field. That's fine. 11 from 22 at the line. 30 free throws shot by Iowa, 5 from West Virginia. And I get a portion of those are at the end of the game, but take away the 6 free throws at the end of the game. We'll say 6 that Iowa shot because of late fouls. We'll go 24 free throws for Iowa and 5 for West Virginia. Are you telling me West Virginia was that much more physical? That, to me, paints the whole picture of what this game was. It didn't matter how well West Virginia played. It didn't matter what West Virginia did, from Harrison to Watson to especially Quinterly, who was lights out and helped put her name on the map nationally. It did not matter what those players did in this game. This was Iowa's to win. This was never even West Virginia's to lose or Iowa's to lose. The outcome of this felt determined before we got to the fourth quarter, and especially as we got to the end of the fourth quarter. The Hawkeyes shot 36%. The Mountaineers shot 34%. It was an ugly game overall. Iowa was shooting 22% from 3 and West Virginia shooting 27% is not good. The only difference in this game, especially given the fact that West Virginia shot 50, I mean, to me, that's where I look. That's when I see who won a game. If I read you the team stats of some of these, who won the game, West Virginia took 15 more shots than Iowa. That is absurd. They had 7 more assists than the Hawkeyes. They were able to move the ball around. Turnovers. Iowa had 15. West Virginia had 9. And you say, okay, well, what was the difference? Especially if West Virginia had 12 more points off of those turnovers, what was the difference? Solely free throws. 25 made free throws for Iowa, 3 for West Virginia. And again, I'm not anti-Caitlin Clark. I'm not anti the narrative that women's basketball should get more exposure, that women's basketball, this tournament, has more stars than the men's side. I don't disagree with that. I don't hate Iowa. I don't hate Caitlin Clark. But watching this game was frustrating because a team that deserved to be in it at the very end, that deserved to win it at the very end, was taken out of it by officiating that just didn't make any sense. And that's the problem that I have, that a narrative trumped the actual result, the true result that could have been 27 fouls against West Virginia, 11 against Iowa. You know, like a 30-5 free throw difference shouldn't be something that I have to justify or anybody has to justify to you for you to go, oh, that's not good. You know, it's not like, this guy's blowing hot air up your skirt. He's, this is clickbait. No, 30-5 in the free throw category. Caitlin Clark shoots twice as many free throws as the entire Mountaineers team. It just wasn't a good representation of what women's basketball is. I've seen it at the top level. I watched Baylor win a national championship in that 2019 year. And I can tell you that it didn't take this level of maybe the only reasonable way for me to put it is live propaganda. It's like I was watching live propaganda. It was, hey, now that we have this captive audience of women's basketball, we can't let Caitlin Clark lose, right? Even when she's not at the top of her game, even when she doesn't take over the game behind the 3-point line in the second half, it was still, we can't let her lose. That's what it looked like. Like for me, if I was a general fan watching women's basketball for the first time, I would watch this and think, that was kind of stupid. Do they just have to let Iowa win? Do they just have to let Caitlin Clark win? And that is not good for the game overall moving forward. I don't think that pushes the sport itself in the right direction. And I want the sport to go in the right direction, but West Virginia got hoed in this. They got screwed in this. And maybe if you do call your own fouls, you know, we go back and we look at the tape and maybe Iowa deserved more free throws than West Virginia. And maybe that the Iowa Hawkeyes deserve to win this game. Sure. But by 10, like this, didn't feel right. It wasn't officiated in a way that had a respect for the game. And that to me is the problem.
That was my fun reaction to Caitlin Clark in West Virginia losing to Caitlin Clark. Just a stupid game if you watched it. I needed to include that again because it's picked up some steam. So I wanted, if you hadn't heard that yet, I needed you to hear it. Or just gruntled, you know? It's just, I love the game of women's basketball. That was not a good representation. This has been, it always will be. I love you guys. I ever told you that? Seriously, this has been a really, really good month viewership-wise, and that makes me so happy. You guys have just made this, you make this show, like when I sit down and record the show, I have like a day job and stuff. I'm 23. Getting old. I love it. It makes me happy because I know you're going to be there listening every day. Come back tomorrow. We'll talk more about sports. This is Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose grande.